Everyone, welcome to this interview with Melinda Dorn of CulinaRecovery. I'm going to read a little description so that I can do justice to her work. Melinda founded CulinaRecovery and she's based in Minneapolis. She works as a peer recovery coach and she supports chefs and restaurants with programs and resources to address the issues of addiction and dysfunction. And she brings to the table wisdom of many, many years of experience as a chef. And she knows what it is to receive peer support, and that's why she focuses on giving that to those who need it. So let's begin the interview. Thank you very much for being here, Melinda.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be bridging the ocean to be able to talk to you today.
It's really amazing that we can do that. Just to set a context for the interview, it is to create a conversation around work-life balance in the industry, something we don't do as much. Even though we should be, because it affects every aspect of our lives. And to give you a little background, well, you probably also realize this from your own work that and as an employee, you think that the responsibility lies solely on the employer to assign you a rota that allows you to have the work-life balance. Perhaps the employer is a sort of concern that there is a possibility that it might undermine, work-life balance might undermine the work ethic of a team. And then we have a culture, as you know very well, it encourages martyrdom, self-sacrifice, and the chef doesn't eat, the chef doesn't eat last, the chef never eats. And leading on from that, there is a bit of work addiction that I'm sure you will speak to. We'll get to that later. That we don't call it anything but passion for the work, but then there are the labels that might fit it better.
Right.
And all these aspects leave us with very little clarity on what we can do about work-life balance. So the response is often, to ignore issues related to work-life balance until they reach a crisis point, and that's not helping anyone in the industry. Neither is it helping the chefs nor the employers. So I'd like to ask you, what was your journey to creating CulinaRecovery?
Well, my journey, I'm 46 years old this year, and I started off my life in an addicted and dysfunctional family. My dad was a workaholic. My mother was undiagnosed, obsessive compulsive. Hoarding was her form that manifested in. My dad's, you could say, manifested in workaholism and addiction to alcohol. And so when I grew up, when I turned 18 and was looking for a life to mimic, I guess, unconsciously, I found one just as dysfunctional and addicted as my family of origin in restaurants. I went to culinary school in 1995 and graduated. My teachers there were fantastic. They took me under their wing. They showed me all of the what to do's and even some of the why to do it that ways. But they didn't show me how to live outside of the restaurant business. We were very encapsulated in culinary school. It becomes very much a competition with your other peers in culinary school. It becomes a very work and study focused life for a few years. And even outside of school, you're usually working your internship coincidentally. So it was definitely a wind up to how to be a chef. Was everything's about food, nothing's about you as a person. And so of course I got into the restaurant industry. I started off as a savory chef and spent a decade or more moving about the United States, working in the winter at ski resorts, in the summer at national parks, where you are encouraged once again you're here to work. You're not here to play. The vacationers are here to play. The skiers are here to play. You're here to serve them. So you would get into these sort of work bubbles. For about 6 months, you would be working 90 hours a week in 100-hour weeks. And then you'd have 2 to 3 weeks off, and that would be your justification for the craziness and the chaos of the 6 months prior, because you took all of your time off at once, and what a life that must be. People would actually envy it. Oh, you work in the national parks. Oh, you work in the ski resorts. How lovely that must be. If only they knew that meant working open to close daily for 6 solid months, or thereabout, depending on the season, right? Um, when I stopped working that sort of scene and started working in brick and mortar, stable, one city at a time places, uh, I found myself continuing that pace, which wasn't ever healthy for me or for my relationships, but I didn't know any other way to work. Nobody was role modeling balance for me. Nobody was encouraging me to take a day and reflect on life and be with your boyfriend or go get a hobby. That was never something that people encouraged me to do. And so I thought I was doing everything right. I was like, this is what it is to be a chef. I'm a chef. And ultimately, I lost myself, my identity. I abandoned myself, really, my identity to my job. I hit bottom in 2015. I was working at a James Beard award-winning restaurant, hadn't taken but maybe a handful of days off in 3.5 years. I was drinking almost every night, unless I wasn't feeling well. Maybe I'd take a night off if I wasn't feeling well, if I had the flu. But other than that, it was tequila every night. I was definitely self-abandoning myself to relationships, codependency, sex addiction. I witnessed some horrific abuses and assaults in the restaurant that I never spoke up about, because that's just not what you do. You keep it in the family. And that's when I started to recognize the similarities between my dysfunctional family and my restaurant's dysfunctional family. There's this sort of mantra of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Don't get in the way. If you're between somebody powerful and somebody weak, don't get in that line of fire. Um, and so I started going to a 12-step program for adult children of alcoholics. And that's when my world kind of came into focus. Oh, look at these patterns I'm reliving. Look at these patterns I'm recreating. Look at these authority figures that I'm still afraid of. Like, is this really going to be my life forever? It was feeling pretty hopeless. I had no idea how to break that cycle of recreating the drama, recreating the chaos that I was getting intoxicated on from my inner drugstore, right? The adrenaline, the testosterone, the melatonin when your body is in pain, and it comes in to numb your feelings. There's a lot of things I just simply didn't know because I hadn't been asking the questions until 2015. And when I did start asking questions, what I found to my surprise was that I had peers, other people who actually were willing to talk about it and talk about their experiences and how they dealt differently with the proposals from work to be a workaholic or be a work addict. I started talking to people who reflected my actual value, not my value based upon how I produce or perform for others. That was huge. And it wasn't a million people, it was just a few. And they weren't professionals. They were just people who at the first I didn't think I had anything in common with, because they were stockbrokers, they were single mothers, they were teachers, and I was just like, well, they're them and I'm a chef, it's different. But with weekly check-ins and accountability partners, I started to focus on the similarities and not the differences. I definitely put myself in the other category for a long time, like nobody will understand me, poor me, nobody gets me, poor me. And that led to this feeling of stuck for a very long time. All of this is to say, since 2015, my goal has been to bring a glint of this sort of recovery into the restaurant industry, whether that's by walking in and talking to chefs and having one of those melodramatic moments where I put my hand on their shoulder and I say, it's okay, I've been there too. It can be another way. I know it doesn't feel like it can be any other way right now, but it can be. And sometimes I meet with resistance, which is what somebody would have met with had they approached me in 2014, right? I'd have been like, get out of here with your woo-woo, feel-good, Brene Brown stuff, I'm tough, I got this, everything's under control. Control is key, But now I'm living a different life. I haven't had a sip of alcohol in over 3 years. I've been working on my emotional intoxication and my emotional sobriety balance since 2016, going on 5 years. I have a relationship with a therapist that I find is really helpful. I suggest it to anybody who has the resources to seek a therapist. Here in the United States, it's kind of difficult because it's outrageously expensive unless you can find charity therapy. But like I said, some of my most important work I've done has been side by side with just peers who want to be there. I think there was a point where I didn't believe anybody wanted to be there for me. Why would they want to be there for me? I'm the misfit. I'm the screw up. I'm the person who's moved 27 times in my adult life. I don't have any really strong friendships because every time I quit a job for a promotion at another place, I lose all my circle of friends because it turns out a lot of my friends were situational friends. They're friends because we work together, and then once I move somewhere else, we're not calling each other up on the phone or anything. So yeah, I now have a life that I love. I love my apartment. I have a newish car. I started taking care of myself physically, mentally, emotionally. I have a good circle of friends who I can count on to be there if I need them. And I could not have said that before. I had insane social anxiety. And I mean, I just remember events where maybe somebody, a normie, I'll call them normies, or civilians as I call them, people who aren't in the restaurant industry, would invite me to functions, and I would get to the door of where the event was being held, and I would just break down in tears because I couldn't do it. I couldn't cross that threshold. I didn't believe, A, that I belonged there, and B, that anybody was going to want to talk about work, which is the only thing I felt I knew how to talk about. And then I would either go home or go back to work, which is my safe spot. Kind of like an alcoholic might keep an empty bottle in a drawer. There were times where I'd have days off and I would go into work kind of just to touch the tables, just to remember that work is there. It's okay. I would almost say, I would almost talk to my kitchen and say, not the people and the things, actually. This might sound a little crazy, but I'd talk to the people and the things, and I would be like, it's okay, I'll be back tomorrow. It's obviously more of a self-soothing thing than an other-soothing thing. But yeah, I that was a whole lot there that you probably didn't ask for, but that's my experience. So I figured I'd share it.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone who listens to it has something to gain from that, I'm very sure. I was very excited when you said you found peers, but I didn't realize that the peers were all outside the industry. So I guess that's highlights the importance of your work in bringing this awareness to the industry that
Yeah.
it's possible.
Well, they're not all outside of the hospitality field. Fortunately, in the last couple of years, starting in 2017, here in Minneapolis, I met a couple other peers who had the similar experiences and wanted to bring hope to restaurant workers. My friend Obadiah O'Connor was just a guest on our chow meeting last night. I had Andrea Devora, Sarah Nelson. These are all people who are invested in the serving those serving organization here in the Twin Cities. So there were people who wanted to see change, and we all have a different angle on it. I promote peer support because I've seen it work. Other people are promoting employee assistance programs in restaurants and even in small restaurants. And that was something that wasn't attainable for many operators because of the expense. So promoting that, promoting a living wage was another angle of, in essence, what peer support looks like. Really, anybody trying to help another person who has a shared lived experience with them, whether they're still in the industry or they're an industry vet, that's peer support. What we're doing right now is peer support. Mutual aid groups like AA and NA and Refuge Recovery and Smart Recovery, those are peer support. There's virtually, if there's two people together talking about really anything, the experience of being a human being, that's peer support.
Thank you. Thanks for expanding on that.
Yeah.
How would you define a good work-life balance? And what was it? I think you've talked about it a little bit, but what was it like trying to strike a balance between work and your personal life during your time as a chef, at least after 2015, if you...
Sure. Yeah.
Mm,
Um, I thought about this question, what is work-life balance? And I would say I would define work-life balance as being where you are at all times. So being present in your life. If you're at work, you're fully at work. You don't have a foot outside of work or in work. If you're at home, you're fully at home. You don't have a foot or part of, when I say foot, I mean your mind. Your mind's not on work when you're home, and when you're at home, when you're yeah, when you're at work, your mind's not on what's happening at home, and when you're at home, your mind's not on what's happening at work. And when you're playing soccer, you're not thinking about what you're having for dinner, right? It's a work-life balance to me means strong boundaries, knowing who you are and where you are at all times, and not having who you are be changed by who you're around, right? That's, in essence, that's codependency. And it shows up more than just the physical manifestation of where's my body right now. But when I took a break from restaurants, and when I first went back, one of the first things I noticed that I was dragging with me was this new sense of wanting to raise the quality of my language. It's so easy to slip back into the curse words and the slang and the slurs and the sexist, racist jokes and everything else like that that live in a restaurant. And when I first walked back into the restaurant, it would have been really easy for me to slip back into old Melinda based upon what was happening around me. Um, Holding that boundary and saying, I don't talk like that anymore, was really challenging. I mean, it took focus for me to not laugh when somebody dropped something, or not chuckle when somebody was saying a derogatory comment to one of their fellow cooks. Um, so work-life balance to me is knowing who you are and wanting to be where you are in your skin, wherever you are.
I think that's one of the best definitions I've heard. And I agree totally with you. I talk about presence as well. It's the most difficult thing, I think, to define, use as a definition, but it is everything. It encompasses everything.
Yeah.
Um, how do you see the problem of poor work-life balance affecting the industry, in particular from the context of the work of CulinaRecovery and things that you see that are faced by your own community?
So the biggest thing I see as a problem is the actually kind of self-abandonment that I described earlier. The idea that I'm not worth it. I'm not worth work-life balance. I'm only worth to the world what I can produce and perform for it. And that is not unique to the restaurant industry. Obviously, I have friends who work in other industries who also feel the same way. And that comes from usually some sort of performative nature in their childhood, right? I think I've been asked, what's the one big mental health issue in the restaurant industry? And I would say it's unresolved early childhood trauma that people bring with them to the back door of your restaurant when they get hired. It's the recycling of the authority figure, the fear of authority figures, right? Yes, chef, no chef, that sort of militant structure where you know your place, don't step outside your place, right? Um, if if we could look at um, not raising the bar to who's getting into the restaurant industry, but or not raising the barriers to who's getting into the restaurant industry, but raise the bar on how we treat each other once the people get in the back door, right? Encourage and invite them to look at what's happening right now. What are you reliving right now, right? In this moment, as you're screaming and yelling, or in this moment, as you're crying in the walk-in, what's the story you're telling yourself right now about today, that you have no value because somebody sent back a steak, that you have no value because the chef just yelled at you, that you have no value because your cooks aren't listening to you and you're the chef and you're supposed to take care of everybody? Like, what's the story that you're telling yourself, and whose voice is that telling you that story? I think, unresolved trauma, I know, manifests as alcoholism, manifests as sex addiction, manifests as, harassment, manifests as self-abandonment, codependency, all those sort of things. So we could treat the symptom of the unresolved trauma. We could medicate away depression and anxiety. We can schedule away work addiction, but we can't really treat the human being based on their symptoms. We have to look at, how did they get like this? And that that's not anybody else's responsibility necessarily, except to hold each other accountable to doing that work. You had asked earlier in the episode about what could an employer do. An employer could role model that, you know, uh, show that they're themselves seeking help at a therapist, that they themselves are seeking help at mutual aid groups, that they themselves are doing this work and are sharing with their employees the changes, right? That they're not doing this work and coming back and being the same person at work, but saving all the good stuff for their family. They could come back and say, whew, you guys, I just had this really great episode with my therapist, and you know what, I'm going to make some changes around here. I'm going to do this from now on. And if you see me not doing it, please hold me accountable. Please tell me. Please come and talk to me, because I want to be less of a screamer. I don't want to be like this with you all. Help me, help me hold myself accountable.
Again, vulnerability. And in terms of work addiction, is that something that you are also focusing on as part of your work?
Absolutely. So, Culinary Recovery, what I've been doing since 2017 is running this online platform on Facebook. And that may not seem like much. There's a million Facebook groups out there for chefs and for restaurateurs and for servers that they could look at. Really, what I'm doing is keeping the conversation alive that change is coming. And if you want to be part of it, here's the invitation to have a conversation about what you'd like to see. Many of the articles that I post and I collate from all over the world have to do with work addiction, and that it's not a United States problem, or that it's not a UK problem, that it's not a Canada or an Australia problem or a France problem or Egypt problem. It's a problem everywhere because of the sort of transactional relationship between people and their jobs, right? As soon as we aren't two people and we're a product and a consumer, right, we become consumed. And that's where work addiction comes in. I've since been lending my efforts to an organization called Chow out of Denver that hosts peer support meetings. And the topic often goes to work addiction. What I just learned, surprisingly, considering I'm now an addictions counselor, I was not aware of this, is the Bergen work scale, or the Bergen work addiction scale, which basically gives you about 6 questions that you can ask yourself to assess your relationship with work and whether or not it's healthy or unhealthy. And the questions are very similar to the 6 questions they ask you when you're getting assessed for alcohol addiction, right? Have you needed to work more to feel the same level of comfort? Has work affected relationships? Has work affected your health, right? Do you repeat the behavior, the work addiction, despite negative consequences like divorce or cardiac arrest or whatever, the collateral damage is for your work addiction? And there's a few other questions. I don't have them memorized, so I encourage people to check out the Bergen work addiction scale on their own. It was developed in, I believe, Norway, which maybe there's no secret as to why they're one of the happiest countries, right? They've got people looking at this. How do we work? Work is such a large part of our lives. How do we work? Yeah.
Scandinavia is famous for taking a stance on work-life balance, so I'm going to take a look at that definitely. What's one piece of advice you would give to chefs who want to improve the quality of their lives? And I think you've given a couple of hints already.
Yeah. Well, again, this is just from my experience, so I don't want to couch it as advice, but this is what worked for me, and that is get friends outside the industry. Focus on the similarities and not the differences. In my previous incarnation as a work addict, I had a partner who, bless his soul, was with me through some insane panic attacks when I would have a day off and not have it packed with things to do. The stimulation I would receive from work, and not just sight, sense, smell, taste, touch, right? The super senses that we experience in the restaurant industry, the chaos, the soul, the love we put into our food, all those intangibles, right? Being a chef is an extra sensory experience. And then I would be on a day off and I would feel numb. I'd feel like the day was on mute, because there was no chaos, there was no stimulation, right? And so I burned through boyfriends seeking that high I would get from work, and it was unhealthy for me to have that expectation on them, right? Fulfill me as much as my work does is not something that people want to see on their online dating profile. So I would say diversify your social portfolio. That will keep you stimulated, right? Have a friend that maybe goes sailing. Have a friend that goes to bowling tournaments. Have a friend, multi-source that stuff. Don't try to extract it from just your wife and your children, right? Those are unhealthy expectations on people outside of work. But it's not wrong to want a stimulating life outside of work. It's just wrong to expect it all to come from one place and one behavior.
And also that will also feed back into that feeling of being a misfit. You feel more of a sense of belonging and not so much like an outsider when you interact, or when you can feel at home with the outside world. That
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of compare the relationship to work. Uh, you hear a lot of the same things coming out of the mouths of former chefs that you hear coming out of the mouths of former victims of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, which is work got me isolated. It got me away from all of my friends, held me, I should say, held me captive away from all of my friends maybe that were on the outside. And then it was able to do whatever it wanted to me, because I had lost contact. I lost perspective on who I am outside of being a partner to my job or a partner to my partner, right? It's it's similar also in the fact that the chaos becomes normal, right? In a domestic violence situation, you don't believe that there's any other way to be. You think you deserve this sort of treatment, and there's a lot of fear there. And in restaurants, it's kind of the same way. You think you deserve this. You've never seen it done any other way. You're just the familiar chaos is better than the uncertain chaos that might come from a career change. So yeah, I would say diversify your portfolio, get with other chefs who've maybe left the industry. I don't encourage everybody who's having a difficulty finding work-life balance in the restaurants to leave the restaurant industry, but find others who've found different ways to work and do what they did. It's kind of the 12-step model, right? If you want what somebody else has got, do what they do.
and there's so many ways to express your love for food today. So it makes
Yeah.
sense to look outside.
Yep.
And the last thing, I'm going to ask you again if you have a different answer, but if not, that's
Sure.
okay. What is one thing employers can do to support the well-being of their staff and therefore the work-life balance?
Right. Role model, role model, role model. I love Brene Brown. Who doesn't, right? I love Brene Brown. And she was talking in her book, I think it was Dare to Lead, about an episode in an airport that she had with a coworker, not really a coworker, one of her employees, I should say. And she was going to pay for a cup of coffee out of her own pocket rather than put it on the expense account. And her employee said to her, hey, when you do that, I pay for coffee out of my own pocket too, because I feel like if you're not using your expense account, how can I use my expense account? That would be weird, right? You own it. You are Brene Brown, and I work for you. If you're not doing it, how can I do it? And that's it right there. If a boss, if a chef, if an owner, if the restaurant manager, if the beverage manager, whoever's in your higher authorities in your restaurant hierarchy, aren't taking care of themselves, how are you going to feel okay doing it as a cook, as a dishwasher, as a server, you know, as a housekeeper in the hotel? How are you going to do that? You're not. You're not. There's that parenting advice that says children are unlikely to follow what you say, but they're undoubtedly going to follow what you do, right? So, and in that sense, yeah, that's what we have going on in the restaurant industry. We have people being promoted through the ranks. Chris Hall from Burnt Chef Project says this perfectly. We're not upskilling our employees, right? We're not giving them the human being skills to become managers. And so what we're doing is we're creating human memes in a sense, right? We're just copying whatever the person did before us. And if the person before us wasn't healthy, we're going to be unhealthy too. We're not really upskilling our cooks and servers to really know. I've said this before too, is hospitality industry is the intersection of human services and food services, but there's been too long a focus on the food and not enough focus on the human piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Thank you so much for all the wisdom that you shared today. Which is the best way for members of the Love Letters to Chefs community to find CulinaRecovery? Is it your website and Facebook group?
Yeah, Facebook group, CulinaRecovery is probably the best way because I'm on there every day trying to find new articles and things to post and make sure people know the conversation's not over. And then an email at melinda@culinaryrecovery.com. And yeah, those are the two best ways.
Thank you.
I'm working on the website, so that might be a little wonky right now, switching platforms and all that. So
I'll post a link to both those platforms.
sure.
The video. Thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.